Welcome, everyone, to the May 6th Knoxville, Knox County Planning Agenda Review Meeting. Assisting me is Executive Director Amy Brooks and Attorney Tasha Blakeney. At this time, I'll turn it over to Amy Brooks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I just have a few quick announcements. I want to first let you all know I've given you all lots of updates over the last year or more of the mobility plan. It has officially been adopted by the Transportation Planning Organization, the TPO board. So Mobility Plan 2050 is now in effect. We are moving forward. You probably have all are aware of this now, but we have a new Knox County Unified Development Ordinance consultant. They are officially on board now, and we will remain on schedule. So I will send you all out our schedule as a reminder, as well as our scope of work, and we look forward to working with this new team. Additionally, I wanted to let you all know that the TTCDA board, which some of you, or it's the authority, some of you may or may not be aware of the authority, but it is no longer in effect. It is something that our staff, we have staffed for some time, but the Tennessee legislature on April 14th and Knox County Commission on April 28th repealed the act that created it. The TTCADA guidelines will remain in effect and be administered by staff. We will work on incorporating those standards into the Unified Development Ordinance process over the next year. But until that happens, staff will administer the guidelines for the TO and the TO1 districts administratively. I think that's all I have today.
Thank you. Let's go into the agenda items.
Okay, we'll start off with agenda item number 6.
This is 5A25OA. It's a city ordinance amendment to include the conversion of an existing building being converted to a two-family dwelling, including that within the principal use standards for a two-family dwelling. So this is to ensure that the design standards for duplexes include the conversion to duplexes, not just new construction. This proposed amendment came about in response to community concern about the visual impact of duplex conversions when staff proposed that the duplex location criteria and the one-year plan be removed as part of its annual update. The conversion of single-family dwellings or other buildings to duplexes is generally a rare occurrence. As I mentioned during the one-year plan update, of the 55 special use cases as of March that reviewed duplex requests in the single-family residential zoning districts over the past 5 years, only 2 were for conversions. Plans review and inspection staff also shared that it is rare to see duplex conversions come through when permitted by right, and the theory is that fire code separation requirements can make such conversions challenging and costly. Regardless of the frequency of this type of development, the principal use standards for a two-family dwelling currently specify that the criteria are only to be applied to new construction. The proposed ordinance amendment expands the review to include conversions, and this ensures a more equitable evaluation of all duplex housing forms. So for this reason, staff recommend approval of the amendment. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Seeing no questions, we'll move on.
Item number 8, 4A25 RZ, PA, and SP. This is a request to rezone a 5.92 acre lot on Rutledge Pike from general industrial to heavy industrial, which requires a plan amendment from general to heavy industrial as well. In the aerial view, you'll see that this property abuts a greenhouse company to the east and an outdoor storage yard to the west, which are light industrial uses. To the north is the established Alice Bell and Spring Hill neighborhood, and the most significant change of conditions to this area in the recent past is the development of the Spring Hill Villas residential community to the northeast. You can see the new pattern of construction to the northeast there. That was completed in 2022. Staff is recommending denial of this request because the primary change of conditions in the area is more residential development across the railroad tracks. Uses permitted in the heavy industrial zone could produce smoke, noise, glare, or vibration that's incompatible with the subject property's close proximity to residences. There's also a church with a daycare program and outdoor playground about 250 feet to the northwest. The applicant has hired a legal representation who provided a letter referencing a staff approval recommending approval for heavy industrial zoning across the street from this property, across Rutledge Pike. And you can see that heavy industrial zoning in the image. However, that property is not near such significant residential development to the extent that this lot is. Each case is different, and our recommendations reflect the distinct context of each property. I'm happy to answer any questions about this one.
I've got a question. So if I looked at this right, there's a 300-foot required buffer between a residential zone and, I guess, the heavy industrial use. So if this was approved, would that essentially mean that they couldn't do the intended use within 300 feet of the neighborhood?
They would have to abide by any buffering requirements within the zoning ordinance as it pertains to permitting, development.
Can we do we have a way to measure 300 feet somewhere on this map?
I can pull up KGIS. I do know that, as I said, there's like a playground that's 250 feet from the edge of the property, but they could.
I guess what I have in my head is how much of this parcel would even be usable. And if it's just the front part that is essentially right next to the other heavy industrial, does that?
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize it went off.
Is the 300 feet that you're referencing, is that a county, I'm sorry, this is Mike Reynolds. Is that a county standard or a city standard that you're referencing?
I think it's a city standard.
Okay.
Plans review and inspection staff, would you like to chime in on any buffering standards for industrial zoning?
Brian Berry with the city's plans review and building inspections. I'm not aware of any 300-foot buffer standard in relation to industrial to residential, but I can take a look in the code just to make sure, but I'll get back.
Yeah, what comes to mind is just the buffer yard requirements. That would certainly be in play. But in general, our recommendation is just based on this lot's close proximity to residential zoning and residential development.
Was there any discussion with the applicant of doing an alternative zone that would satisfy their needs?
We did. We spoke with them, and their particular use has to do with, and I think the letter provided by the applicant explains this in greater detail, but it's about like copper smelting. I don't want to say it incorrectly, but it's taking auto parts and salvaging them for other uses. So it would be pretty intensive, and that's why it would require the heavy industrial zone.
So for buffering and under table 6.1, Brian, did you look at that? It's talks about the minimum interior side, minimum corner side back, and minimum rear industrial dimensional standards. So it's it varies a little bit, but so for example, interior side setback 15 feet, unless abutting a residential district, then it's 50. That's, yeah, it's 50 for if it's abutting a residential district for all of those.
But I think the rear said it was 300 feet, right? Bit of butts? I don't think I imagined it, but I could have.
50,
Yeah, it's 50.
50 feet.
But
In
with-
heavy industrial?
Yes.
with this one specifically, there's a railroad right-of-way in between the two. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes, there's,
So would that be considered abutting? No, okay.
Okay. Any other questions on this item? Okay. We'll move on to the next one.
Item number 14, this is 5C25RZ, 5A25SP. This is a rezoning and plan amendment request for a roughly 15,500 square foot lot on Gertrude Avenue in the south waterfront area. This request is to go from the low-density residential and RN2 zoning district to medium-density residential and RN4. You can see that the requested RN4 district would be a minor extension from the west. However, the actual adjacent land use on that RN4 lot is a single-family home, and the subject property is part of a long-standing single-family neighborhood context. This is also a steep area with hillside protection overlay on the entirety of the property and most of the surrounding neighborhood. The South City Sector Plan land use classification is LDR. This is aligned with most of the neighborhood character and is noteworthy that the MDR, medium-density land use, recommends locations with slopes no greater than 15%, whereas the lot and much of the neighborhood have slopes exceeding 25%. The one-year plan's land use classification for this property is the South Waterfront Mixed-Use Special District Type 2, which permits consideration of a wide range of zoning districts, including RN4. The South City Sector Plan has not been updated comprehensively to reflect this newer land use class, which is why it's still LDR. The South Waterfront Mixed Use designation also permits consideration of the property's current zone, RN2, as well as RN1. Gertrude Avenue is a narrow, unstriped residential street with a potentially conflict-prone intersection to the east with Dixie Road, where it's misaligned and quite steep. Or off-center, not misaligned, but there's two intersection points. Engineering indicated that if more intensive residential development was pursued on this property, they would require the developer to expand Gertrude to 20 feet from where it's located to Davenport Road. The South Waterfront community has been developing rapidly as a whole, resulting largely from the South Waterfront Vision Plan and corresponding form-based zoning code. However, the plan did not lay out a vision for more intensive development of this area along Gertrude Avenue, which has remained stable and virtually unchanged for many decades. Staff recommend denial of an expansion of MDR and RN4 here because Gertrude Avenue is not designed for an increase in residential intensity, and it's incompatible with the single-family context within which this lot is already situated, as well as the steep slopes within the hillside protection overlay in the rear, not being aligned with the location criteria for the MDR land use. For these reasons, staff recommend denial, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Did you say that they would have to extend the road the entire way, 20 feet?
Well, that was part of the conversation. The input from city engineering was to expand it to 20 feet to Davenport to the west. So it's,
Okay, where the RN4 is already located?
right.
Thanks.
So kind of dovetailing into that, I mean, have you had, or did you have any conversations with the applicant about potentially that would be a condition if it were to pass? How did they react to that?
They received that information and still wanted to pursue this rezoning.
What did you say the size of the lot was again?
It's a little over 15,500 square feet.
So under the current zoning, they could do, it's RN2, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So they could do a duplex under the current zoning, that's the most intensive option.
And I believe it could be potentially up to 7 units with RN4.
Okay. We'll move on to agenda item number 20.
This is a 12A24 PD. This is a planned development proposal for a 650-unit residential development called Cardinal Place on 2 parcels that comprise 32.5 acres. The subject property abuts the Williams Creek Golf Course with primary access on Delrose Drive. 13 exceptions from the property's RN4 and RN1 zoning district are being requested to permit the proposed development. We don't see planned development requests very often, so this slide explains its purpose. The PD process permits exceptions from the zoning code to provide more flexibility for architecturally and environmentally innovative projects that align with our adopted plans. If, and only if, those applications provide compensating amenities and benefits to the city and surrounding neighborhood. These are the criteria for evaluating a planned development. The first of which is ensuring that a project is consistent with the purpose of a planned development, as just described. We also consider whether it will be injurious, affect orderly development, is supported by adequate infrastructure, is designed to minimize traffic impacts, and we also consider its compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood. Here is the more visual, less technical site plan for Cardinal Place. As I mentioned, it's a proposed 650-unit development comprised of 570 apartment units in 6 4-story buildings located towards the center of the property with 80 townhouses along the perimeter. There are numerous amenities within the development, including a pool, clubhouse, community garden, pickleball courts, natural park, walking path, and other features. There are 2 large detention ponds along Delrose Drive to the south that would capture stormwater from this development. For development of this scale, 723 parking spaces are required and 981 spaces are provided. There would be 2 access points on Delrose Drive to the south, one on Riverside Road to the east, and there would be pedestrian exclusive access to Brooks Avenue to the north. This development proposal includes 13 requested exceptions from the RN4 and RN1 zoning districts. In general, these requests would facilitate development that's more aligned with what is allowed in the RN6 multifamily residential neighborhood district, which is much more intensive than the surrounding RN1 and RN2 context. It's noteworthy that this property came before you in 2024 with a rezoning request from RN1 to RN6. Staff, this body, and City Council determined that RN4 was a more appropriate zoning district because it balanced residential assets of the area with the wooded single-family surroundings and substandard street infrastructure. The applicant then came back with what is essentially an RN6 development through the planned development process. In this context, these compensating benefits warrant particular scrutiny. The planned packet includes this rather bleak scenario of what development would look like if it proceeded under its current predominantly RN4 zoning standards. RN4 has a maximum lot area of 40,000 square feet for the multifamily use. So this scenario shows the amount of subdivision that would be required if the quantity of units the applicant desires were pursued in that way. The applicant claims that they would be forced to reduce green space, decrease connectivity, increase hardscape with more runoff, design a more car-centric layout, have limited or no common space, and waste construction materials on more inefficient buildings. This scenario is important to note because many of the listed benefits of the Cardinal Place development rely on this alternative scenario in order to make their case as a benefit. The planned development proposal enumerates 22 benefits that are organized according to 3 categories: community and recreation, environmental and preservation, and infrastructure, access, and mobility. I'll summarize these benefits and staff's analysis within each theme. Within the community and recreation category, the applicant lists the following amenities as recreational benefits intended for use by the general public: a playground, a natural park, a dog park, a community garden, pickleball courts, an art area, walking paths. They also present the use of individually sold townhouse units located around the perimeter of the development as a benefit because it provides a transition of intensity. Staff believe so this is staff's analysis. Staff believe the location of the parks, gardens, and ball courts are not easily accessible to the general public. The amenities would not be viewable from any of the streets that access the property because they are so deeply embedded within the development. They appear more intended for the future residents of Cardinal Place rather than the surrounding neighborhood or the city at large. This is especially apparent with how the amenities are intermixed with private benefits like the pool, volleyball court, and clubhouse, which are intended exclusively for Cardinal Place tenants. So you would be allowed here but not there, here but not there. The walking path throughout Cardinal Place provides a recreational amenity for its residents, but it does not improve connectivity to any place except within the development itself. The only pedestrian access point that connects to existing sidewalk infrastructure is the Brooks Avenue entrance, and it is located about as far from the cluster of park spaces as you can be. There is wayfinding signage illustrated on page 25 of the plan packet, but the site design does not elicit a welcoming atmosphere for public use of these amenities. There is also no explanation provided on how these benefits would be physically or financially maintained for public use in perpetuity, though the applicant did verbally indicate that membership dues could be a means for maintaining them. Should membership fees be charged, this could be more of a business enterprise than a public benefit. Staff encouraged the applicant to coordinate with city staff on the park and recreational facilities to see if they aligned with recreational needs of the area and could be promoted by the city as public park space. As you may know, the city is in the midst of a Parks and Recreation master plan, so this is a good time to collaborate. Staff even made the introduction to assist with a meeting, but a meeting did not occur. The other benefits noted in this section pertain to the location and individual sale of townhouses. The development of townhouses is not a public benefit and is already attainable through the RN4 zone. The applicant credits the site design with several environmental benefits: conservation of green space, preservation of natural grade, an increase in sustainability through building efficiency via more units per building. At least 75% of the building footprint would have white roofs. Preservation of approximately 4.27 acres of existing trees and rock outcroppings, and strategically retaining trees to the extent that it is feasible on approximately 2.3 acres. A 35-foot natural buffer between the adjacent properties and new development, though this is not shown as extending to the entire perimeter abutting other property. Staff's analysis is that many of these purported benefits rely on the argument that development under RN4 zoning is necessarily more impervious, autocentric, discouraging of green space, and would result in less efficient buildings. This is based on the scenario we saw before that shows how much the land would need to be subdivided for the extent of multifamily development being pursued by the applicant. While the RN4 district is not intended for the scale and massing of multifamily development that's proposed, that does not mean the zone hampers walkability, conservation, or sustainable building design. To the contrary, the RN4 district actively promotes green space with the pocket neighborhood design standards in Article 4.5. Additionally, the density of the residential buildings themselves should not be considered as a public benefit, as they represent more dwelling units and therefore more profit for the development. While it is notable that the developer intends to preserve 4.27 acres of the more challenging areas to develop on this 32-acre parcel, the development also proposes 258 more parking spaces than is required. This excessive parking design runs counter to the argument that the zoning exceptions are necessary to create a more environmentally conscientious development. In the infrastructure, access, and mobility theme, the walking paths within the development are listed again as a mobility benefit because the paths connect to existing sidewalks on Brooks Avenue. The paths also connect to Delrose Drive and Riverside Road, which currently have no sidewalks. They list providing parking spaces and covered bike parking for the recreational areas, bike repair station, 5 electronic vehicle charging stations, a claim that stormwater infrastructure is improved compared to development under the RN4 zone, widening of Riverside Road to 20 feet, and construction of a sidewalk from the Riverside Road entrance to Brooks Avenue. 4% of the units being type A accessible because it is an increase from the 2% that's legally required. Creation of parking signage, and pedestrian access to the Williams Masterson Cemetery that's adjacent to the proposed development to the south on Delrose Drive. Staff's analysis is that with regards to the small private cemetery, it's unclear if the heirs of the cemetery that happen to abut this property desire a public walking path from this development to their cemetery. It is also of unknown benefit to the city to make it more accessible. There appear to be about 11 grave sites there. Parking spaces for community use of the park areas are listed as a benefit, though if these amenities were deemed to be public assets, parking would be required at permitting and would not be an added benefit. Similarly, with the Riverside Road widening and potential sidewalk addition, city engineering would require that this substandard local street be widened to at least 20 feet to safely accommodate the significant increase in traffic generated by this development. With regards to a sidewalk, one could argue that Riverside Road's location within a parental responsibility zone meets the essential nexus test for a sidewalk to be required, negating the depiction of these infrastructure improvements as being a voluntary benefit. As with the recreational amenities, the EV charging and bike repair stations are all internal to the development and do not reflect apparent convenience or benefit to the broader community. The proposed modest increase in accessible housing units by 2% is not substantial. Lastly, a key benefit in this section is that stormwater infrastructure would be improved without further explanation provided. This property is entirely covered with mature forest in its current state, which offers numerous benefits, especially for stormwater control and quality. This proposal would clear that forest for a large residential development with 2 multi-acre detention ponds. The forest where the property fronts Delrose Drive would be replaced by detention ponds, one of which would be so large that it would likely require its own retaining wall along the street face. It's debatable whether stormwater infrastructure is improved by this development, and the RN4 standards do not require worse stormwater management. The first sentence of the planned development article states that exceptions from zoning regulations should only be applied to projects that provide compensating amenities and benefits to the city and neighborhood. It is staff's determination that the enumerated benefits are not commensurate with the zoning exceptions requested, and therefore this application does not meet the intent of a planned development. The alternative scenario of development under RN4 takes issue with the district's maximum lot area of 40,000 square feet for multifamily development and demonstrates the amount of subdivision that would be required if it was developed with that use exclusively. This site plan is a misrepresentation of the wide range of housing forms and layouts that could be considered under this district, which includes single-family, duplex, townhouse. Townhouses do not have a maximum lot area, and small-scale multifamily buildings. Pocket neighborhoods, which are a clustered group of dwellings around a common courtyard stewarded by residents, is also a development form permitted in RN4. The RN4 standards do not necessitate a more auto-centric development scenario as presented by the applicant. More importantly, the alternative RN4 scenario would not receive support from staff if it came through special use review, which would be required for a development of that scale. The RN4 district is simply not intended for the intensity of multifamily development that's desired by the applicant. This appears to be an attempt to rezone through the planned development process with benefits that are insular to the Cardinal Place development and its future residents with insufficient benefit to the surrounding neighborhood and city. This case package includes a letter from the city's urban design and development team indicating that they agree with planning's assessment that the project does not provide a substantial benefit to the city. For these reasons, staff recommend denial of the Cardinal Place planned development, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Jesse, could you go back to the criteria for planned development? We don't see a whole lot of planned development. I think we've only seen, what, 1 or 2? Have we seen more than that?
Maybe a handful of them.
Yeah, so, yeah, maybe a handful. Could it be said that had they made these amenities more accessible, maybe turning them inside out, making them more accessible, reducing some of the parking, maybe adding sidewalks, would that make it more, I guess, appealing for a support for staff?
I think we would have wanted to see more collaboration with the city as it pertains to benefits for the city and the broader neighborhood. These are meant to be public benefits. So that would be one piece of it. But I think with a development of this scale, on the heels of a rezoning, that did not approve development of that scale, we would want to see benefits that balance the level of intensity.
So aside from the insufficient public benefit amenities, were you all reasonably comfortable with the other approval standards such as not injurious and traffic and all those elements up there?
I think we did have concerns about it being injurious, considering the scale of the development, the impact it would have on the street infrastructure, and the character of the surrounding neighborhoods. This is let's see if I can. It would be a real outlier in the area with the development of that scale. And I think the access on Riverside was a particular concern to the community.
Thank you.
I just had a question going back to kind of the bleak RN4 design that was proposed. Am I right in understanding that staff doesn't necessarily agree that this is the alternative outcome? It seems like the proposed design of this are two pretty distant ends on a spectrum. Can you just remind me sort of what the limitations were around this? It was the lot sizing for multifamily?
Yeah, so RN4 has a maximum lot area of 40,000 square feet for the multifamily use, because it's intended to be small-scale multifamily development. So this is showing the amount of subdivision that would be required if they were to pursue exclusively a multifamily development. But again, that would have to come through special use, and staff would not recommend approval of something like this.
And you all said that you believe there are alternative designs that could incorporate townhouses and multifamily that maybe don't appear like this gridded structure necessarily, is that?
Yes, townhouses don't have a maximum lot area. There could be an integration of townhouse, duplex, single-family, multifamily that could be considered here. It's a 32-acre property, so there's a lot of opportunity for a wide range of development forms under RN4.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Boyer?
I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry.
So you mentioned, I don't guess there hasn't been a whole lot of conversation between the city or Parks and Rec and the city and the applicant. Does that, I mean, I guess in the planned development, this is a challenging one. I mean, it's 30-plus acres. We don't see a whole lot of tracks like that left, especially this close to downtown, which is very close. An RN4 to me, especially with respect to multifamily, is kind of an infill almost situation. You know, you've got a vacant lot. If it's appropriate for RN4, you do it, and you can do some multifamily on it. It would be a challenge looking at that to try to, with setbacks and how the roads would have to work. You know, is RN4 right? I feel like RN5 might be better anyway, but is the area appropriate for that? So then it kind of falls back to a planned development. So, hey, let's look at it, and which is what you're doing. But I guess it's a two question. I mean, if the city was involved, I mean, are they willing to take over the parks? Do you know if they have given any indication that if they say, hey, why don't we just give you some of this land and the city, have they talked to the city about that at all, or would they be open to it?
That meeting did not occur, so I can't speak with
Okay,
authorities.
so we don't really know that, okay. Okay, I'm just trying to get my mind around it, because I feel like, I remember when this came through in 2024, right? We rezoned it. Did they come through with that concept plan? Because I remember looking at the concept plan and being very impressed with all the green space and how it was laid out and.
Can I
Yeah, please.
Because I am just having the same deja vu of looking at that and thinking about some conversation that was had about a pool, and would people understand that, was the pool really for the public, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from a green space and park perspective, I remember it coming through and liking it. So what I'm hearing from you is, upon further review, you guys have kind of dug down into it and say, okay, well, we don't, because in a plan development, we don't really approve the concept plan. Is that right? It's just kind of we look at it and say, okay, move forward. We'll look at it closer. Is that accurate?
That was for informational purposes, and staff did not have any kind of review or recommendation at that time. It was just an opportunity for the applicant to share their initial concept.
Gotcha, okay.
And this is the preliminary plan review.
Understood, okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure I understand it, and I guess everybody else understands that was not really a concept plan approval, although it was a concept plan. But I mean, I certainly feel like it's in the right direction. I mean, for what the spirit of plan development is, which is, okay, we've got a scenario that's very close to the city, and I'm not trying to deliberate here, by the way.
Friendly neighbor lawyer here is going to turn on her light and say this conversation is getting a little bit
Okay.
closer to deliberation than council is comfortable with. Of course, reminding agenda review is for education. If there are questions, then certainly that's appropriate, but I think it would be appropriate for me to chime in now.
That's fine, yeah, I didn't
Thank
mean
you.
to take it into deliberation, but, so, clarification on the concept plan, but I just think, I guess everybody just needs to work together. I think there's a way to get to the end result that everybody can be happy.
So at what point in the process does a development of this size over this amount of acreage, to John's point, at what point with all of these amenities, green space, just this, at what point does that actually end up serving the public good? Do you get where I'm going on this? Like, I understand in its character right now, this is not for everyone in that area, but at one point, does 32, 33 acres, whatever it is, become its own public good? Like, if you have 650 units that are serving 650, 1,200, 1,800 people in Knoxville that have the ability to be in an apartment, to go to a townhome, just like how many people are even in that surrounding area? Is it 2,000 people? Is it 1,000 people? So at what point do you actually develop something that is meeting public need, is for the public good, you're providing that housing, because that didn't exist before, so now the whole character changes. Do you get where I'm going on this at all?
Sure.
I know it's just a different twist of it, but because it is such a large development, at what point does it become actually meeting that need?
So the zoning code does provide several examples of what it intends when it describes a public benefit. Privately sold housing at market rate is not listed as a public benefit, as intended by the plan development process. If there were senior housing set-asides or affordable housing set-asides, that would be a different conversation. A lot of what is proposed is pursuing what the plan development describes as being public benefits. So you have green space, park space. It was staff's evaluation that those green space and park space components of this development were so insular within the development that they really weren't supportive of the surrounding neighborhood so much as the future residents of the development.
And I think that's where I'm going, Jesse, is on this second half of it. At what point does the development become supporting that area sufficiently because of the massive, just the sheer quantity of people that are going to be served by that new development, rather than what's surrounding? It's almost like it's this raw piece of land that is of the capacity to meet the demands of this new housing ability. It's not the first part. I totally understand what you're saying about elderly, if there was an elder, but at what point does that morph itself, or is that just not something that's been considered before?
I think public benefits are generally intended in the context of existing residents, right?
Okay.
the
So
existing
one could not
context.
be created.
It gets pretty theoretical when you're thinking about the desires of future.
I live half my life
Residents.
in theoretical, so, okay, understood. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll be quick. I have a question about the, I'm kind of hung up on the issue with like the green space in the park and then the city's involvement if it's a public space. And I understand they didn't have a meeting and I'm with you on that. Like to what, is there any like, not requirement, because I know there's probably not, but like guidance or just like what we've done in the past in terms of like the level of involvement that the city necessarily has to have in making that determination? Am I making it like with the green space, or is it possible for a private property owner to provide a green space that could, again, we're back in theory, but like be a public benefit and the city doesn't necessarily have to be involved? But I mean, I understand the logic that if it's a public benefit to the city would have a say, but do you see what I mean? Like, what's the line there?
Yeah, I think you note a good, gray area, and that was something where we were seeking clarity and more conversation between the city and the developer.
So what's the process? I think this is maybe the second plan development that I've seen since I've been up here, but what's the process on Thursday is there a feedback, amend the plan? I mean, as I do think that the initial thing we saw in December was supposed to be that. So at this point, how do we address maybe what we see as shortcomings with the applicant, and can this be worked out, I suppose, Thursday, or is this an all or nothing type
So
of?
the code speaks to that. The planning commission must recommend either approval with conditions or modifications, or denial of the preliminary plan.
And there will be a final plan that comes through if there was some sort of approval.
Then denial of the preliminary plan, that is the end game. I mean, that's like all stop. But the others do, as Jesse was pointing out, we would see a final plan.
Correct. It goes to council next. If it was to be approved on Thursday, it would go to council. It also can be, if there was a denial, it could be appealed to council.
But there's not a take two kind of, the appeal is the only route for that. It wouldn't come back to this body with modifications taken on without our guidance, but
I think if the applicant wanted to take your feedback on Thursday and revise their plan, they could do that.
Like a postponement, like
Yeah.
you take it under advisement and bring it back.
so that is another, a fourth route.
Correct.
So if it's a denial, what time period has to lapse before he can bring it back, before the applicant can bring it back?
Would that be a typical 1 year, or what if they come back with another plan development that's
It'd have to be
entirely different?
Substantially different, yeah, they could come back within
And
that
there
year.
would be no wait period.
Correct.
Yeah.
I would want Tasha to take a look at 6.7B in advance of Thursday. So just make sure that we have that you can postpone it.
So does that mean that on Thursday, we will get a clear, you may do this, or this in
Yes.
terms of our actions in the
Yes,
body?
we'll do that at the very beginning.
So if we give specific revisions to it, we would send it to council, or does the developer, would you ask him to accept those, or not? Or you just say, okay, we're gonna turn all these amenities from the inside out, and we're gonna approve it and send it to council?
You have the authority to do that, yes. And then they can make a decision whether or not they want to keep it moving forward with council, or if they want to withdraw it once it gets to council. All right, we will move on to agenda item number 30, the plan amendment and rezoning.
This is 5E25RZ, 5C25PA. It's a request to rezone and amend the land use classification from agricultural zoning with a suburban residential place type to CA general business with a corridor commercial place type on a 2.46 acre parcel on South North Shore Drive, northeast of the intersection with Ebenezer Road. In the zoning layer, you can see that this property is surrounded by residential zoning. There is a commercial node at the intersection of South North Shore Drive and Ebenezer, and along the North Shore corridor west of that intersection. Staff had recommended denial of a rezoning to CA across the street from this property, but it was approved. And the reason for recommendation of denial was because of the narrow street conditions and to discourage a pattern of spreading commercial development along this section of the South North Shore Drive corridor. You can see that this property is part of a comprehensive area of suburban residential place type. In the aerial view, you can see that the established use here is a church. We did revise our staff report on this case to better reflect the warranty deed for this lot, which does explicitly prohibit commercial development and asserts that it must be maintained as church property. While we do not typically reference the development intent of the applicant at the rezoning stage so that all potential uses with the zone are considered, it is worth noting in this case that the basis for the rezoning request is to permit an electronic messaging center sign for the church. These signs can be quite bright, and for that reason they are prohibited in many zones except the more intensive ones like commercial zones. Even with the deed restrictions on this property, staff are recommending denial of this rezoning and plan amendment request because it simply doesn't meet the criteria for either of them. A plan amendment must be the result of an error in the plan or meet two of the other criteria pertaining to changing conditions. And the suburban residential place type here was deliberate. There have been no changing conditions to support a change here to corridor commercial in this context. A rezoning must meet all of the evaluation criteria, and even though CA zoning here may not have a direct negative impact due to the deed restrictions on the property, it could be used to further justify expansion of commercial zoning along this corridor where the street infrastructure, the residential development, and the environmental constraints on the area are inappropriate for more retail-oriented zoning. It's not aligned with the intent of the CA zone to have this church rezoned in that manner. I'm happy to answer any questions. Proceed to item 39. This is 5N25RZ, 5F25PA. This is a rezoning and plan amendment request to go from agricultural with a rural conservation place type to planned residential up to 12 dwelling units per acre with a suburban residential place type. This property is 18.48 acres and it's accessed on Snyder Road, a minor collector street, and Outlet Drive is a major collector street nearby to the south. While there has been intensive residential development next to the subject property to the south, these abutting lots only access Outlet Drive, a major collector street that's relatively new in its construction. It has a 48-foot pavement width, sidewalks, and a center turn lane. The subject property's access is on Snyder Road, which is a minor collector with a 17-foot pavement width, no shoulders, and crests and curves that make sight distance challenging. You can see this on the place type map that this property is part of a large swath of the rural conservation place type, which is consistent with the hilly conditions, narrow roads, and more residential, less developed character of this area as you move north. In the aerial, you can see that the residential development ranges with a max of 4 to 5 dwelling units per acre in density where the rural conservation place type exists. This is consistent with what's permissible in that place type, and you can see that this property's access on Snyder is at a significant bend, and it's directly across from a driveway for a large private primary school to the west. Even though the multifamily residential development to the south is along Snyder Road, It only has access to Outlet Drive, and this is due to a condition that was placed on the property prohibiting access to Snyder because that level of intensity could put a strain on that street infrastructure. This is an exhibit included in the package. The rezoning of the abutting lot to the south, that's currently planned residential up to 18 dwelling units per acre. It was informed in part by the Tennessee Department of Transportation capital improvements that were considered at that time in 2015. There were thoughts that TDOT would connect Outlet Drive to Parkside Drive across I-40. This transportation project has not come to fruition, and there are no plans to pursue it at this time. So there are not changing conditions that support an expansion of intensive residential development north along Snyder Road, where the context is more rural. Staff are recommending denial of this request because it does not meet the criteria for a plan amendment, and it's incompatible with infrastructure conditions. While there have been changing conditions south of this property with multifamily residential development, those properties only access Outlet, which is a much more suitable street for that intensity. And here you can see the street conditions where the subject property accesses Snyder Road. There are crests and curves that increase risk of traffic conflicts, and this is especially concerning when it's across from a school where children will be coming in and out daily during the week. PR up to 12 is out of character with residential development on Snyder, and this rezoning could be used to justify further expansion northward, where the comprehensive plan is deliberately designated to be more rural in character. So for these reasons, staff recommend denial. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jesse. We will move on to the next item.
Item 40, this is 5P25RZ. This is a request to rezone the rear 5 acres of a parcel from agricultural to planned commercial. This property accesses Asheville Highway, east of its intersection with East Governor John Sevier Highway, and it's located just south of Holston River. In the zoning layer, you'll see that this property abuts a large planned commercial area that is coming back before you this month for master plan review with a large surface parking lot, baseball fields, and an RV campground, among other uses proposed. This rezoning is the same applicant, and it's important to note that the master plan you're reviewing is not inclusive of the subject property for this rezoning. This rezoning would likely contribute to a desired expansion by the applicant, though. The front of this property along the Asheville corridor is already zoned commercial, which is why it's not included in this rezoning request. In the place type map, you can see that the subject property does have the corridor commercial designation, but it abuts rural conservation, which is designed to conserve forests, ridges, open space, wetlands, and other environmental features. It's typical to see the RC place type follow more natural features rather than property boundaries. So it's noteworthy that two very different place types here follow the property line rather than acknowledge the natural features of the area. In the aerial map, you can see that this property is densely wooded. Historic aerials indicate that it has never been disturbed, or at least not since the 1930s. So this is a very mature forest along the Holston River. When you look at the slope analysis, it's understandable why this property was never developed. It's almost entirely above a 25% slope with substantial portions steeper than a 40% slope. The slope analysis, while purely advisory in the county, recommends disturbing no more than 1 of the 5 acres. Staff recommend denial of this rezoning to the planned commercial zone because it's incompatible with the extreme environmental conditions on this site. This is a rare case where the place type does not, could be considered a mistake. The corridor commercial place type follows the property boundaries of the lot, but the RC place type should have been considered here due to the natural and topographic features of the land. Rezoning this lot from agricultural to planned commercial would be inconsistent with the comprehensive plan's Policy 7 to encourage development that conserves and connects natural features and habitat. This property is also in the adopted East County Community Plan, which identifies this area as a rural corridor intended to offer scenic views where development patterns should preserve the rural look and feel of the area. So for these reasons, staff recommend denial.
Okay, seeing no questions. Thank you, Jesse. That was a lot to cover. Turn it over to Kelsey now for the next 3. We'll start off with number 13.
All right. This is a city rezoning request to rezone a 3.9 acre property located on McCamey Road from RN1 Single Family Residential Neighborhood to RN2 Single Family Residential Neighborhood. The hillside protection overlay would be retained. The surrounding area largely consists of single-family dwellings on a range of lot sizes, with limited townhouse and small-scale multifamily developments closer to Western Avenue, a commercial corridor to the east. Zoning in the surrounding area largely consists of properties zoned RN1 and RN2 in the city and agricultural and planned residential with up to 3.5 dwelling units an acre in the county. It is worth noting that the RN2 zoned properties that surround the subject property are neighborhoods that were established in the 1980s and 90s and align with their assigned RN2 zone. The subject property is designated low-density residential under the city's one-year plan and Northwest County Sector Plan, and the RN2 district is permitted in low-density residential areas. The subject property is within the hillside protection overlay, and the steepest portion of the property is near the narrow access point on McCamey Road, with slopes in the 25 to 40% and above 40% ranges. There's a TVA transmission line easement that runs through the property that separates the steeper front portion from the flatter rear portion. Since this report was published, the applicant informed us that the TVA easement is closer to about 75 feet on both sides, which would span approximately 1.1 acres. The primary difference between the RN1 and RN2 zoning districts are the dimensional standards. The RN1 district requires a minimum lot size of 10,000 square feet, whereas the RN2 district requires a minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet. Incorporating the easements on the property, the subject property could yield approximately 20 lots. And if more than 5 lots are created, a private right-of-way with a minimum width of 40 feet would be required. At its most narrow point, the subject property is roughly 35.5 feet wide. The proposed rezoning does not comply with the General Plan's Development Policy 6.3 to encourage development in areas with the fewest environmental constraints. This narrow driveway access on a steep slope and the presence of the TVA easement do not support more intensive development at this site. For these reasons, staff recommends denial of the RN2 single-family residential zoning district. Are there any questions?
I've got a quick question. So you'd mentioned, I guess, excuse me, at that pinch point, there's only 35 feet.
More or less, yeah. It's close to 35.5.
I guess how does that get handled? I mean, if it's a private road, a public road, it's got to be 50 feet right of way. And then, as you mentioned, at JPE, 40 feet. How can you develop it, I guess? Or, I mean, is there a way of, how the city engineering, do they allow it with less right of way? I guess that would be the question.
Can you repeat that, please?
Yeah, basically, you've got a situation where at the entrance, there's only 35 feet. Let's say theoretically, there's only 35 feet of property line. In the city requirements, say 40 feet of right-of-way on a JPE and 50 feet on a public road. Does the city allow that to happen? Am I asking that properly, I guess?
It really depends on, I guess, what the planning regs would say. I think there is sometimes some flexibility in those cases. From a safety and functionality standpoint, I wouldn't have an issue with it. I think at the end of the day, it would just be what the regulations, what kind of flexibility is there.
Okay, yeah, I'm just trying to clarify. I don't know if it's RN1 or RN2. I'm just saying, can you even do it first, develop anything? So that was just my question. Thank you.
All right. The next item is item 32, 5-G25RZ. This is a request to rezone a 1-acre property in the Hardin Valley area from agricultural to planned residential with up to 2 dwelling units an acre. This property is located on the north side of Buttermilk Road. The surrounding area largely consists of forested tracts of land, farmland, and single-family dwellings on various lot sizes. Though agricultural activity is still prominent in this area, since the early 2000s, zoning has gradually transitioned away from agricultural zoning to RA low-density residential zoning and PR planned residential with up to 2 to 3 dwelling units an acre. The subject property's place type is rural living in the Knox County Comprehensive Plan, which allows consideration of the PR zone with a density of 2 dwelling units an acre. Per Appendix H of the Comprehensive Plan, partially related zones must meet additional criteria, and this rezoning would meet the first criterion, as the allowable land uses in the PR zone with up to 2 dwelling units an acre align with the preferred housing mix of the RL place type. The subject property is within the rural area of the Growth Policy Plan. Residential development in the rural area is limited to the following conditions: no more than a density of 2 dwelling units an acre, access to sanitary sewer or public sewage system must be available, and it must be on a collector road with an 18-foot pavement width. The subject property does not comply with the second requirement as it is on a septic system and does not have, in connection to a nearby sewer system could be challenging. As such, the proposed rezoning does not meet the requirements for the development in the rural area. Because the subject property is located in a rural part of the county and does not have easy access to a sanitary sewer connection system, the proposed rezoning also conflicts with the implementation policies 9.3 to focus growth in areas already served by adequate infrastructure and implementation policy 9.5 to avoid approving isolated developments where infrastructure is inadequate or not yet planned. For these reasons, staff recommends denial of the PR zone with up to 2 dwelling units an acre. Are there any questions?
Move on to the next one.
All right. This is item 34, 5-I-25RZ. This is a request to rezone a 1.25 acre parcel located on the south side of Shawd Road from agricultural to neighborhood commercial. The surrounding area primarily features single-family dwellings on various lot sizes and limited townhouse developments. The Shawd Road Improvement Project is underway west of the subject property, and Amherst Elementary School is a quarter-mile to the east. Zoning in this area largely consists of agricultural and planned residential zoning with up to 4 to 6 dwelling units an acre, and there is legacy industrial zoning to the south. Limited light industrial and commercial zoning is present to the east at the intersection of Johnson Road and Shawd Road. The subject property is designated suburban mixed residential in the Knox County Comprehensive Plan. The CN zone is partially related to the SMR place type, and additional criteria must be met. The CN zone meets the first criterion as it aligns with the secondary commercial uses of the SMR place type. Though partially related, this section of Shawd Road is largely residential with limited civic uses such as churches and an elementary school, both of which support a residential environment. The comprehensive plan has noted other areas in the community as more appropriate for commercial activity, such as the intersection of Shawd Road and Johnson Road, which has been identified as a mixed-use node to serve the surrounding community and designated with the town center mixed-use place type. The CN zone provides the opportunity to locate limited retail and service uses in a manner convenient to, yet not disruptive to, an established residential neighborhood. And it should generally be placed at street intersections that include either a collector or arterial street and as close to the edge of a neighborhood as possible. The subject property is not located at the intersection of classified streets and is in the middle of a section of Shawd Road that mainly consists of residential development and limited civic uses. The proposed rezoning does not comply with Implementation Policy 2 to ensure that new development is sensitive to the existing community character. Though there are development standards in the CN zone for properties that are adjacent to residential zones, such as increased setbacks and lighting standards, the placement of commercial and retail services in the middle of a residential block may disrupt the character of the surrounding residential environment. For these reasons, staff recommends denial of the neighborhood commercial zone.
And just a quick hypothetical question. If this parcel had been directly across from the school, would that have been assessed differently?
So we still believe that this is more of a residential environment. And had it potentially been closer to that town center mixed use, I think that would have been a different conversation. And but it's still not located at an intersection of classified streets or just at an intersection, and it's adjacent to residential properties.
Okay, seeing no more questions. Thank you, Kelsey. We're going to move on to agenda item number 35. This one is not a recommendation of denial. We are recommending approval, although there are some challenges with this particular site, and then you all have received a lot of comments on it.
Thank you, Amy. This rezoning request is for a 30-acre property along Majors Road. The property is located half-mile north of Emory Road and within a mile radius of Gift Schools. The applicant has requested to go from agricultural to PR up to 5 dwelling units per acre. The predominant zones in the area are agricultural, RA, and PR ranging from 2.9 up to 4.25 dwelling units per acre. The most recent A to PR rezoning examples include the 2022 rezoning of a property northwest of the subject parcel. This parcel that were rezoned to PR at 2.9 dwelling units per acre. And the PR at 4.25 dwelling units per acre was rezoned in 2020 for the abutting eastern parcel. The property is located at the edge of planned growth area. The place type is SR with a stream protection area along a blue line stream running through the property. The general development pattern along Majors Road consists of houses on large lots and undeveloped parcels. Most of the small lot detached single-family subdivision are accessed from Thompson School Road, including the adjacent subdivision that includes 189 lots. The property is within a mile radius of a park and the Gift School, and there is a commercial node along Tazewell Pike. Sorry, this is an image from a different project. So from an aerial view, we can see some of the changing condition in the area, including the construction of new subdivisions. The Gibbs Middle School was constructed between 2016 and 2018 that coincided with the widening and sidewalk installation along Tazewell Pike. The intersection of Thompson School Road at Emory Road was realigned and improved between 2019 and 20. There are also some funded and planned sidewalk installation in the general area and a proposed greenway that is not funded. As Amy mentioned, access is of concern. Majors Road is a narrow local road, as you can see on that image on the left out corner. The pavement width is only 16 to 18 feet. The property also has frontage on Coppock Road, which is even narrower at 15 feet. There are line of sight concerns at the intersection of Majors Road and Emory Road. Looking west, there is a blind hill. There are two step outs that offers potential connection to the adjacent Thompson Meadow subdivision. One is within the cul-de-sac, and the other step out splits the adjoining property lines at Squirrel Run Lane that may limit access. staff recommends approving the PR zone with up to 4 dwelling units per acre with a condition. Staff believes that the condition is to improve the Majors Road from the intersection of Emory Road to the development access point for any public or private right-of-way connection, or providing suitable access via the abutting stub outs with necessary improvements as required by the Engineering and Public Works Department. Staff believes the PR zone at 4 dwelling units per acre is consistent with the changing conditions and the surrounding range of densities. The proposed amendment would allow developments to be concentrated in suitable areas of the site, avoiding the Blue Line stream and the FEMA flood zone that runs on the northwest part of the property. The density is supported by the suburban place type. The zoning is consistent with adjacent sites. The rezoning is also consistent with the Comprehensive Plan Implementation Policy 5 that encourages to create neighborhoods with a variety of housing in proximity to amenities, and Policy 9 that encourages to coordinate infrastructure improvements with developments.
I have a question on the proposed conditions. If the second condition was to be the one followed, providing suitable access via the stub outs, are we effectively, I guess, proposing that traffic to the neighborhood primarily be routed through the adjoining neighborhood then? Is that the kind of implication?
That is one of the possibilities.
Okay.
Thompson School Road is wider. It's 18 feet, and it also has an improved and kind of light intersection at Emory Road compared to Majors Road.
Are there any other items that commission would like to discuss?
I do want to clear up the confusion about the 300 feet on number 8. I guess it's 300 feet, you can't have a salvage yard, so anyhow.
Commissioner Midas.
I'd like to talk about something not regarding any of the cases on the agenda. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. And I apologize for, I feel like every year this vote on the nominating committee and executive committee kind of catches me off guard. I know this is probably my third vote, and in the past, I've always been kind of confused about how the nominating committee actually gets selected. I feel like it's always just a yes/no vote when it comes to my vote. And then subsequently, they're responsible for creating a slate for the executive committee, again, which I'm always thought it was just a yes/no vote. I spoke with Director Brooks today. She said that there is some flexibility as far as wanting to make changes or add people to that list. I wish you guys could kind of talk about it a little bit so everyone's kind of in the know about what our limitations are or what we can do regarding adding people onto the executive committee, being part of the nominating committee. And then I have one more question after that discussion happens.
Yeah, I think the bylaws speak specifically to that, go ahead and read that.
Commissioner Midas, I have the bylaws pulled up, actually. So under Section 8, nomination of officers, the process is spelled out in our bylaws that the process that we have to follow. So during or before the April meeting each year, the chair is charged with the responsibility of appointing a nominating committee. That nominating committee has to consist of 3 members of the Planning Commission, none of whom are incumbent officers themselves. So they have to be 3 nominating committee members who are not currently incumbent officers. The nominating committee has to meet to identify and present a slate of nominees for the offices of chair and vice chair at the regular Planning Commission meeting in May. So I would presume, I haven't seen a report from that committee, but I would assume that they would then be prepared to present that slate in May. Then at the May meeting, the bylaws say, in addition to the slate of nominees offered by the nominating committee, nominations for elected officers may be made from the floor. So the options available during the meeting on Thursday would be to, as you said, to vote yes or no, or to make additional nominations for consideration at the meeting.
Is that yes or no vote in this meeting in May? Or,
In May, yes, that's right.
so in
May.
2 days, we're going to be voting on the executive committee?
That's right. I presume.
No, the
No, I'm sorry.
nominating committee.
The nominating.
Their selections.
So not, it would be the chair,
No,
you're
no,
voting for the chair,
They're
vice
bringing
chair.
forth the candidates.
And we'll vote on whether to accept it or not accept it
On
in 2
Thursday.
days. Is that right?
That's my interpretation of the bylaws.
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So they're voting, you all are voting on the chair and vice chair. The executive committee is then, once the chair is selected by this body, it is their job to appoint the executive committee. You all do not vote on the executive committee.
So they're not part of the executive committee, the vice and the.
They are,
No,
yes.
they are. They're officers, but then there's an executive committee as well.
Okay, okay. And so when will we find out who the nominating committee has selected for the?
Tomorrow, Thursday.
So we can't find that out beforehand?
So then, let's just walk through the process here. We'll practice, so to speak. So they will deliver the candidates that they have selected, and then we will open it up to the floor for other potential nominations. So we're not limited to just the nominating committee making selections for their recommended chair and vice chair. So if you don't like their selections, you say, hey, I'm not going to make an example, but so-and-so commissioner, I'd like to nominate them. And you can. I guess you can nominate yourself if you wanted. Yeah.
So then what is the motion at that point?
Then we close, there's no more nominees, and in June, we will vote based on that slate of candidates. So you have a month to consider.
Okay, so there's 2 candidates from the nominating committee,
Yeah.
and then say 2 more candidates come out of Monday's, or out of Thursday's meeting. So then we'll have 4 candidates. And then in June, we'll have a vote on
The candidates.
the 2 candidates,
The
the vice and
potentially
the.
4 candidates if there were 4 selected.
Okay, so we'll choose 2 from that 4 for the vice and for the
Yes.
chair.
Yes.
And as far as like getting selected for nominating committee, that's just a
Chair.
decision you make.
That's right, yeah. That's one of the duties of the chair.
I guess one more thing I'd like to talk about is, it's since we're going to be changing direct chair and vice chair, I know that it is also up to the chairperson to select the roll call order. It seems like that roll call order is something that's every meeting. I would like to propose that the roll call order changes each meeting. Maybe it's a more random process so that it's not always fixed and it's not always based on a decision by the chair. How would I do that? How can I make
Well,
that suggestion?
That would be amending the bylaws.
It just seems like it's a more fair process if it's a more random selection or it changes and it's not something that's consistent for the entire year.
Well, those are fair comments. A chair may have different strategies involved. One may be that sometimes we have inactive commissioners that aren't, let's just say, fully informed, and they look to be guided in some cases. And you may put a more experienced person on the front end. Not always, I'm just saying that's a potential strategy on the front end of a vote, of a roll call vote. And is that good or is that bad? I don't know. But a chair has
Or you're going to have someone who's very vocal at the very end, every vote.
I guess as a chair, you're given certain authorities, and if you want to just strip the chair of any authority, why don't we just rotate everybody being a chair once every
Oh,
month?
I just think it's a roll call, and it seems like a fair option just to make it random and not make it consistent for the entire.
It's one vote, what does it matter? Well, you get one vote, each person gets one vote. What
Because
does it matter what order?
Well, because we usually do the roll call when it's a more contentious vote, right? And the way the roll call vote has been this past year is that I'm always third to last, And I feel like I'm always in the minority when it comes to these votes. And I would like my vote to be higher up in the pecking order.
Where would you want it to be?
I don't know, but I don't want it to be third to last every time.
You want to be fifth to last?
I want it to be random,
Okay. Well,
so that it's not fixed every vote.
That's a fair comment. As the chair's prerogative, and then, if we, as a body, want to amend our bylaws, we can. And that's, that's up to our body, so we can do that.
So it's meaning like, how would I do that? Do I make a motion that I'd like to amend that? Do I come up with an amendment? How do we vote on something like that?
I'm gonna ask these two next to me about.
Let me take a look. I'm trying to find, I'm not sure.
I don't believe it's in the bylaws.
I don't think that's actually in the bylaws, that particular.
It is.
There are general provisions that talk about the delegation of duties and that the chair is vested with a lot of duties, including the management of the meeting and the order in which things are handled and the order of consideration of applications. So by default, the chair of this body, as with many bodies, has a lot of discretion. So I think it would be fairly inconsistent with the bylaws as written now to get that specific in terms of how a roll call would be handled. It's not to say that you couldn't do that, but I would be happy to sit down with you and talk with you, Commissioner Midas, about what that might look like, what you had in mind. And then in terms of amending the bylaws, if you'll give me 1 second, I can find the provision regarding amendments.
But it's not in the bylaws, so
It's
it's
not in
not
the
something
bylaws.
that we would have to even make a motion about. It's more up to the discretion of the chairperson, is that
That's how I
correct?
read the conduction, in general, so that the bylaws don't get, and for obvious reasons, most bylaws don't get that specific about like what order are we going to do things in, what are we going to do. They leave a lot of discretion to the chair or the secretary for this or the treasurer, depending on what kind of board you're serving on. So in this case, the conduction of a meeting, in large part for the bylaws, give much of the discretion on how the meeting is conducted to the chair. So I don't know that you would have to specifically amend. It would be essentially adding something specific to deal with that particular issue. And then regarding amendments to the bylaws, if you'll give me a second, I can find that provision as well.
While you're looking for that, I've got a question that, because I don't think that since I've served on the body that there's ever been in the election of the executive officers more than one candidate per office. And I'm looking at you because you've been on here longer than I have, so you might remember that.
Yeah.
Do you remember that ever being the case?
I don't, but I'm not saying it hasn't occurred, but I don't.
Sure, okay. And the point in asking is how that vote then would get handled if the nominating committee suggests A and B, and then there are C and D candidates then also added to that? Does that mean that we would then have a vote that says, for chair, we are vote for either A or B, and then it's a split vote for that? Or do you know
Ms.
yet?
Blakeney, do you want to
Yeah,
cover that?
I think I understand your question. In other words, is it a package deal or could you parse?
Exactly.
No, the nominating committee is charged with the responsibility of putting forth and presenting a slate of nominees for the officers, plural, of chair and vice chair.
So it is a slate.
Well, yes, but I don't think that it means, you have to, I think you could take and turn those votes. What you would want to do, though, is, my view of how this would be handled is that the nominating committee would present that slate, then either this body would vote to accept that slate or to open up for additional nominations to be considered. So you might have a nomination only for chair, but not one for vice chair.
I see.
So you would determine whether to accept that slate as proposed, or if you want to consider elected officers, nominations for elected officers to be made from the floor during the meeting. So I don't necessarily think that you have to vote.
It's a
as
package deal. It's a-
Right, exactly.
Thank you for using just easy vernacular for me.
I would try. And then, Commissioner Midas, to answer your other question, so one of the things you had asked was about the executive committee. That's in Article 5 of the bylaws. In July, the chair appoints the executive committee. That executive committee consists of the officers who are elected. So you've got the chair and the vice chair, plus 3 other members of the planning commission. So that's how the executive committee differs a little bit from the officers. And then, to answer your final question, Article 10 has to do with amendments. The bylaws may be amended, repealed, or suspended by the affirmative vote of not less than a majority of the entire membership of the Planning Commission, provided no amendment or repeal shall be adopted until 5 days' notice of the proposal has been provided to all members of the Planning Commission. So if there's an effort to amend or repeal or and otherwise modify the bylaws, then the proposal has to be presented with 5 days' notice and then voted upon.
Okay, and the fact that the chair is the person responsible for the slate of the nominating officers, that is in the bylaws?
Yes, so that's exactly right. The chair is given the responsibility of, in April, of appointing the nominating committee. And again, so that responsibility falls to the chair, and the specific guidance given is that the 3 members cannot be incumbent officers themselves. So the nominating committee members can't be incumbent officers.
And as a member of the Planning Commission, am I allowed to make additions or changes to that nominating committee?
No, that's a responsibility that is specific to the chair. So the chair, as long as the chair the requirements are do it in April, appoint 3 members, and they can't be incumbent officers. That's the responsibility. Then later, the nominating committee is required to present that slate. And then any member, not just nominating committee, but any member of the Planning Commission can then make a nomination from the floor.
For a specific position,
That's
either
right.
chair or vice chair?
Yeah, or both, yeah.
Or both?
Yes, that's exactly right. And that is contemplated that is to be done at the meeting in May.
And the chair has to open it up for consideration?
That's right. Yes, the bylaws require that nominations be made, or at least the opportunity for nominations to be made from the floor in May. That's right.
Okay, and then regarding the roll call, is that going to be up to the new chair to decide then on how he wants to assign the order of the roll call, or he or she?
So the short answer to that is I would say yes. There are provisions, as long as those changes are consistent with the bylaws themselves and don't otherwise conflict with the bylaws. So the bylaws give, again, like I said earlier, give a lot of discretion about the conduct of the meeting to the chair, but there are rules, like Section 11 has to do with voting. So the matters that are supposed to be heard, they have to be put forth on a motion, seconded. The commission chair conducts the vote by asking individuals to say yes or no. And the commission has to inform the recording secretary of the number of yes and the number of no votes. If there's a question as to the votes, then a roll call vote shall be taken. So that's really the only specific in terms of it's the order of things and the process used, but it does not get into the weeds of what order each person's name should be called.
So then it doesn't have to be the chair assigning the roll call. It doesn't specifically say that the chair does that.
I don't think it's going to get that specific. I think that whenever I look at the duties of the officers,
I'm sorry to be taking you guys' time.
no, you're fine.
Just feel like this is something we should talk about and it'd be helpful to everyone to understand this process, because
So Article 9, I think, is probably the closest answer that I can point you to in those, in the bylaws, Commissioner Midas. It says that when there's a parliamentary matter that's not covered specifically by the bylaws, then simplified rules of order can be applied, and that it's within the discretion of the commission chair to determine what simplified rules should apply. So that's really that is the most, kind of the most specific guidance that we get from the bylaws about the meeting, is that the chair can simplify the rules of order and apply which rules. In other words, give parliamentary matters consideration to the chair.
okay. Is bylaws on the website?
They are, yes.
Okay.
Yeah. In fact, if you just Google Planning Commission bylaws, it'll pop right up.
Okay, thank you.
And by the way, I was the very last vote on the roll call vote.
I know that,
So,
I
yeah.
know that. I appreciate that.
All right, we're adjourned.